Picture this, a woman, completely naked, stumbling through the cobblestone streets of ancient Rome, her body covered in human waste and fresh wounds, while thousands of Romans roar with bloodlust as guards drag her in chains toward the Colosseum. But here's the thing that'll make your blood run cold: that parade through the streets. That wasn't even the worst part of what was about to happen to her. What I'm about to tell you is so disturbing that modern historians literally tried to bury the story for centuries. And once you hear the full details, you'll understand exactly why. Because what the Romans did to women who defied their empire wasn't just execution, it was something so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's cartoon. And by the end of this video, you're going to learn 3 things that'll change how you see ancient Rome forever. First, how they turned executions into sexual entertainment for massive crowds. Second, what specific crimes guaranteed a woman this horrific fate. And third, how Roman emperors didn't just watch these spectacles, they personally designed and participated in them. This is the brutal truth about ancient Rome's most depraved spectacle, and I'm warning you right now, what you're about to hear is going to disturb you on a level you didn't think history could reach. If you think you can handle the brutal truth about humanity's darkest impulses, then buckle up, because we're diving deep into something that'll haunt you long after this video ends. Now, when most people think about Roman brutality, they picture gladiators fighting to the death, right? Lions tearing apart criminals in the arena, maybe some unfortunate souls being crucified along the Appian Way. But here's what they don't tell you in history class. All of that was basically the opening act, the real horror. The stuff that even hardened Roman soldiers uncomfortable, was reserved specifically for women who dared to defy the empire. We're talking about the 1st through 3rd centuries CE, the absolute height of Roman power, when Rome controlled most of the known world and considered itself the pinnacle of civilization. They had aqueducts, they had the Colosseum, they had a legal system that influenced law for the next 2,000 years. They thought of themselves as sophisticated, cultured, enlightened. And yet, at the exact same time, they had perfected a form of execution so degrading, so deliberately designed to destroy not just the body, but the very concept of human dignity, that it reveals something terrifying about what humans are capable of when they have absolute power. Because here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. For the Romans, simply killing these women wasn't enough. Death was too quick, too merciful, too forgettable. No. What they wanted was to send a message so powerful, so viscerally terrifying, that no woman would ever dare step out of line again. They wanted to weaponize sexual humiliation as the ultimate form of state terror. These weren't just executions, they were carefully choreographed public spectacles designed to strip away every shred of humanity before death finally came as a mercy. The Romans had turned public death into pornographic entertainment for the masses, and they had refined it over centuries until it became a form of psychological warfare so effective that entire cultures changed their laws about women's rights just to avoid having their female citizens subjected to Roman torture. Let that sink in for a second. We're not talking about the random cruelty of individual madmen. We're talking about systematic, state-sponsored sexual violence that was so normalized, so embedded in Roman culture, that families brought their children to watch in full. Learn. So let me paint you a picture of what this actually looked like, because the details are going to make you sick. Imagine you're standing in the Roman Forum on a typical execution day. The streets are packed with unwashed bodies, the smell of rotting food mixing with the metallic scent of fear and excitement that hangs in the air whenever something violent is about to happen. And then you see her, a woman, completely stripped naked, being dragged through the crowd in chains. Maybe she committed adultery. Maybe she was accused of treason. Maybe she simply refused the sexual advances of someone powerful enough to have her condemned. The crime almost doesn't matter at this point, because once you've been sentenced to damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, your fate is sealed, and that fate is going to be so much worse than simply being torn apart by animals. As she's dragged through the streets, the crowd doesn't just watch, they participate. They throw human waste at her, rotting vegetables, sharp stones. Guards make strategic stops along the route at locations specifically chosen to maximize her humiliation, outside temples where she once worshipped, past her family's home, through markets where she used to shop. This isn't random cruelty. This is calculated degradation designed to erase not just her life, but her very existence as a respected member of the community. And we know these details because Roman writers like Martial documented them, keeping meticulous accounts that historians tried to bury for centuries because they were too disturbing to acknowledge. The guards had specific training in how to maximize the psychological torture. They knew exactly how to break fingers if a woman tried to cover herself, exactly when to pause to let the crowd's fury build, exactly how much physical trauma she could endure before losing consciousness because they needed her, aware and alert for what came next. But here's what makes this even more twisted. Families brought their children to watch these parades. Parents literally used these public humiliations as teaching moments, pointing out to their kids what happens when you defy Rome, when you break the rules, when you threaten the social order. Some family members of the condemned were even forced to participate in the stone throwing themselves, because refusing would mark them as sympathizers and potentially subject them to the same fate. And the guards who specialized in these street parades, they had training. Actual professional training in the art of psychological torture, in how to time each humiliation, how to orchestrate maximum trauma, how to ensure the woman arrived at the arena broken, but still conscious enough to experience every moment of what was about to happen. And trust me, the street parade was just the beginning. What waited in the Colosseum was so much worse that it makes the public humiliation march look like mercy. Now we get to the arena itself, and this is where things go from horrifying to something that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. Picture 50,000 Romans packed into the Colosseum, cheering like they're at a sporting event, except instead of watching gladiators, they're about to watch a human being's final moments turned into pornographic theater. Because the Romans didn't just throw women to the animals, they created elaborate mythological reenactments where condemned women were forced to play the roles of characters like Europa or Leda, figures from mythology who were sexually assaulted by gods in animal form. And when I say they were forced to play these roles, I mean the Romans literally trained animals to sexually assault these women while the crowd watched and cheered. This isn't speculation or exaggeration. We have detailed accounts from Roman historians like Cassius Dio, who described how the emperor's favorite, Messalina, personally attended these spectacles and took detailed notes on the techniques used. The Latin term for what they did was supplicium, which doesn't just mean execution. It means the systematic destruction of a person's humanity through prolonged suffering. They had specialists who trained specific animals for this purpose: bears, bulls, horses, conditioning them to attack in ways that would maximize both the sexual violence and the duration of suffering. And the crowd participated in real time, voting on which torments should come next with hand signals, thumbs up for more humiliation, gesturing for specific acts they wanted to see performed. Parents explained to their children what was happening, pointing out anatomical details, discussing the animal training techniques, describing the sounds the woman made as educational lessons about the consequences of female disobedience. The emperor himself would watch from his special box, positioned for the best view, because witnessing these spectacles was about demonstrating power, not just over the condemned, but over everyone watching, everyone who now understood viscerally what Rome was capable of doing to anyone who stepped out of line. And they made absolutely certain these women remained conscious through as much of it as possible. The crowd would actually demand it, shouting for guards to intervene if the woman passed out too quickly, because they wanted her aware during the final moments when the animals were literally tearing her apart. But as absolutely horrifying as this was, there was one category of women who faced something even worse. A fate so specifically designed for psychological torture that it makes everything I've just described look almost merciful by comparison. The Vestal Virgins. If you know anything about Roman religion, you know these women were sacred, priestesses responsible for maintaining the eternal flame of Vesta, granted privileges and protections that made them more powerful than senators in some ways. They took vows of chastity that lasted 30 years, and if they kept those vows, they were basically untouchable. But if a Vestal Virgin was even accused of breaking her vow, whether the accusation was true or not, the Romans had a problem. See, they couldn't just execute her like a common criminal because she was sacred, and killing a sacred priestess might anger the gods and bring down divine wrath on Rome itself. But they also couldn't let the accusation go unpunished, because that would undermine their authority and suggest that even sacred women could defy Roman law without consequences. So they came up with something worse. something that technically didn't violate the religious prohibition against spilling a Vestal's blood, but was so cruel that it became the most feared punishment in all of Rome. First, they brought her before the entire Roman Senate, not for a fair trial, but for a ceremonial stripping. She would stand there, naked, in front of Rome's most powerful men, not for minutes, but for hours as they debated her fate. This wasn't a quick process. It was deliberately prolonged, letting her stand there exposed and shivering while they discussed the specifics of her crimes in graphic detail. We know from Pliny's letters, which were hidden for centuries because their content was too disturbing, that emperors like Domitian personally designed these ceremonies to maximize the psychological impact, even specifying the exact positions the Vestal should be forced to hold, how long she should stand, what parts of her body should be beaten with rods. Not enough to kill her, just enough to make her skin split and bleed while she remained fully conscious. But the real nightmare came after the Senate finished with her, because then they took her to an underground chamber and buried her alive. Now, this wasn't a quick burial. The Romans were too sophisticated for that. They created special chambers just for this purpose, rooms deep underground with just enough air to keep the Vestal conscious for days, sometimes weeks. They left her a small lamp, a loaf of bread, a jug of water, not enough to survive, just enough to prolong the agony of dying. The walls were lined with broken pottery designed to shred her fingers if she tried to claw her way out. Every single detail was calculated for maximum psychological torture. And here's the part that'll really get you. They didn't just bury her and walk away. No, they brought her family, brought crowds of Romans, to listen to her screams echoing up from underground day after day, week after week, treating her slow death as a religious ceremony, a public reminder of what happened when sacred women broke their vows. There's a documented case of one Vestal virgin who survived for 18 days in that underground tomb before they finally pulled her out. Not to free her, but to execute her properly, because by surviving so long, the Romans claimed she'd corrupted the sacred ritual of her punishment. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is all horrible, but surely the emperors, the most powerful men in Rome, they couldn't have personally participated in this depravity, right? They just sanctioned it, maybe watched from a distance. Yeah, about that. You're going to want to sit down for this part, because what I'm about to tell you about imperial involvement is going to shatter any remaining illusions you had about ancient Roman civilization. Emperors like Caligula didn't just watch these spectacles, they choreographed them. We're talking weeks of planning, consulting with architects about SIG, HT lines, working with animal trainers on conditioning techniques, bringing in professional torture specialists to design the exact sequence of humiliations. This wasn't madness or sadism in the clinical sense. This was calculated, systematic brutality elevated to a state function. Caligula specifically used these public sexual humiliations as diplomatic tools, forcing foreign dignitaries to watch Roman executions as a demonstration of what Rome was capable of doing to anyone who defied them. He had a special private arena built in his palace where he could test torture techniques on slave women before rolling them out in the Colosseum. Treating the refinement of sexual violence like other emperors treated the development of military tactics. Nero took it even further, sometimes dressing up as a gladiator and personally participating in the rape and murder of condemned women, turning his own sexual violence into public entertainment that Romans cheered for. And when I say this was systematic, I mean the Roman government created actual official positions for managing these spectacles. There were magistrates whose entire job was organizing public degradations, with salaries paid from state funds, with professional advancement based on how creative and memorable they could make the humiliations. The Romans even built this into their foreign policy in ways that'll make your skin crawl. When they conquered a region that had a female ruler or influential women, they would sometimes specifically capture those women and subject them to public sexual humiliation in Rome itself, broadcasting the details across their empire as a warning about what happened to women who thought they could wield power. Entire cultures changed their laws about women's rights and women's roles in society, specifically to avoid giving Rome an excuse to subject their women to these torture spectacles. So, surrender treaties actually included clauses about preserving the dignity of female captives, which tells you how widespread and feared these practices had become. And here's the thing that really gets me. This didn't end quickly. This wasn't a brief dark period in Roman history that they quickly moved past. These practices continued for 3 centuries, only gradually declining as Christianity spread and people started questioning whether turning sexual violence into mass entertainment was really compatible with any moral system. But even after Christianity became the official religion of Rome, these spectacles continued for decades. It wasn't until the 4th century CE that they finally stopped. And even then, it wasn't because of imperial decree. It was because Roman crowds themselves finally lost their appetite for watching women be tortured to death, because the arenas started sitting empty, because 3 centuries of Christian influence had finally, slowly, shifted the culture enough that people stopped showing up. That's how deeply normalized this brutality had become. It took hundreds of years of active religious and philosophical opposition to convince Romans that maybe, just maybe, choreographed sexual torture shouldn't be family entertainment. The archaeological evidence drives this home in ways that'll make you physically ill. When they excavate private Roman homes from this period, they find artwork depicting execution scenes in dining rooms, decorative mosaics showing women being sexually tortured to death that people looked at while eating dinner. This wasn't hidden shameful behavior. It was so normalized that it became home decor. And the infrastructure survived longer than almost any other Roman institution. The systematic sexual humiliation of condemned women outlasted gladiatorial combat, outlasted animal hunts, outlasted most of the religious festivals, because the psychological systems that supported it were so deeply embedded in Roman culture that they resisted change even when the empire itself was crumbling. Says, "Oh, here's what keeps me up at night about all of this. The Romans didn't think of themselves as monsters. They thought of themselves as civilized, as sophisticated, as the pinnacle of human achievement. They built roads and aqueducts while simultaneously perfecting the art of turning human suffering into public spectacle. They wrote philosophy about virtue and justice while developing professional career paths in sexual torture. They genuinely believed they were the good guys, the bringers of civilization and law to the barbaric world. And that should terrify you, because it reveals something fundamental about human nature, that any society, no matter how advanced or cultured it considers itself, can normalize the unthinkable when it serves the interests of those in power. And before you think this is just ancient history with no relevance to today, think about our own culture for a second. We don't parade people naked through streets anymore, sure, but we do engage in public shaming on social media that destroys lives and reputations. We turn people's most humiliating moments into viral entertainment, consuming their pain for likes and shares. We create systematic harassment campaigns that drive people to suicide while thousands watch and participate online. The technology has changed, but the impulse, the human capacity to find entertainment in another person's degradation, to participate in collective cruelty while telling ourselves we're on the right side, that hasn't gone anywhere. The Romans thought they were civilized while cheering for women being sexually tortured to death. What are we telling ourselves we're civilized while doing? What entertainment have we normalized that future historians will look back on with the same horror we feel looking at Roman execution spectacles? That's the question that should haunt all of us, because the distance between Rome's Colosseum and our smartphone screens might be a lot shorter than we want to believe. So the next time you find yourself consuming someone's public humiliation for entertainment, ask yourself, would a Roman watching from the Colosseum recognize the look on your face? Because I guarantee you, they would. And that should scare the hell out of all of us. The tools change, but the darkness? That's always been with us, waiting for the right conditions to show itself again. And recognizing those echoes of Roman brutality in our own world, that might be the only thing that stops history from repeating itself in new and equally horrifying ways.